Alright then, it seems like every time I turn around there's another angle to come at this from, so let's have a chat about the criticism I had very frequently posted and reposted in the comment section of my 4K Switch 2 gameplay versus Steam Deck Cyberpunk 2077 video, wherein I compared a pile of the brand new direct from CD Projekt Red themselves direct capture 4K videos of Cyberpunk 2077 running on the Switch 2, side by side with the game running on a handheld gaming PC with an exact and precise match to the so-called Golden 40 settings that the Steam Deck owner communities collectively agree on is the very best balance of performance and presentation for the Steam Deck for this game. And that is the same footage you're looking at in this video, except I've changed how it's presented this time for a very deliberate reason I'll get to in a minute or two. Instead of showing half the horizontal frame for each, so we have a full scale pixel for pixel side by side, this time I'm showing them full frame side by side at 50% scale to the original 4K recordings. And since this video has been edited and uploaded at 4K, if you are able to watch this full screen on a 4K screen, that means what you are seeing is effectively each screen presenting with the same pixel count exactly as it would when displayed on a 1080p screen. Like the Switch's own built-in screen, for example. So before I bite in proper, let me be clear about something else. I actually removed a stack of these comments because they were hyper repetitive, and many, despite supposedly coming from different usernames, all shared identical or very nearly identical phrasing and were all posted in a very tight window and then stopped and then came back in another very tight window, almost as if someone or a few someones were trying to copy paste spam it endlessly using sock puppet accounts into my comments section because, well, they had an agenda of some kind. And no less than 4 of these supposedly individual accounts all went as far as to try and respond to literally everyone else's comment with these copy-pasted text over and over and over and over again. Yeah, here's the thing, you can't get away with that on my channel, kids, because I'm super vigilant about nuking that clown malarkey, and I caught them all, but I did leave up a couple that were not obviously copy-paste spam from stock puppet or bot-controlled accounts, because it's a sentiment that deserves addressing. So here is a representative one with some interesting tonal quality to it. You can't compare Steam Deck to a dock mode of the Switch, brah! You have to compare the Switch 2 in handheld mode to Steam Deck, which runs at lower settings and much lower resolution. So yeah, brah, take that comment and chew on it. I love how he thought this was such an own. Just throwing those bras out there and chew on it. Come on. You know what? Brah, I did indeed. Brah, chew on it. Brah. Seriously, who the fuck talks like that? Much less types like that. Brah. So here is the deal with that once I brah chewed on it, brah. The Steam Deck does not have a docked or undocked distinction in its functionality. Hell, it doesn't even have a dock. It doesn't come with a dock in the box, and Valve do not sell any kind of official dock. They don't even license the Steam Deck branding to third-party licensed accessory docks, for crying out loud. There's no such thing as a Steam Deck dock. You can, of course, use it with many kinds of docks, because it is basically not much more than a pile of PC laptop hardware smooshed into a form factor designed specifically for gaming. That's literally what it is. All of the bits inside the Steam Deck, it's laptop hardware. But that does mean any kind of dock you can use with a laptop, you can use with the Steam Deck too, because it is literally just a PC. Same goes for the ROG Ally, which is what I own. Some companies even started making docks with stand combinations specifically for these devices. But unlike what happens when you dock the Switch 2, or indeed the original Switch for that matter, nothing changes about the hardware's power profiles or performance if you plug in a dock for HDMI output or whatever. And I mean literally nothing. You can manually edit the Steam Deck's thermal power limit, which can be adjusted all the way down to as low as 3 watts up to its top end of 15 watts. And this will impact both the battery life, which is why people turn it down to get better battery life for games that don't need the full power, but it also harms performance because, well, the system's not letting the APU have as much power. And from a certain point of view, that is a little bit like what the Switch 2 does. When you undock the Switch 2, it switches to a lower power limit mode compared to the docked mode, but it also adjusts how it's using its hardware. It adjusts how it's using the CPU, the GPU, the memory, all to balance out for better battery life. There are significant performance profile changes between docked and undocked, which is why devs need to design their games to accommodate for that. But when we're talking about running Cyberpunk on the Steam Deck, you need every last watt of its full power profile or the game just won't run properly, and certainly not at the so-called Golden 40 ideal settings. So, with all of that in mind, about how the Steam Deck does not have a docked mode, how the game only runs properly at full power anyway, what I showed in that video, and indeed in this video, was the Steam Deck running the game at its best possible performance and presentation. Ideal settings, full TPU setting, zero handicaps or unessential compromises to settings for performance or presentation. So, comparing it to the Switch 2 under identical conditions was in fact extremely fair. And when I say identical conditions, what I mean is this was the Switch 2's best possible mode also, running docked and therefore at its own maximum power profile potential, just like the Steam Deck, using the 4K output mode over HDMI for the 1080p render of the game in the game's best possible graphics settings, aka quality mode. You can't ask for a more even and fair match than that. Both games are running looking the best they possibly can in the hardware's best performance mode. Yet I still got a bunch of people pissing every pair of pants they own, screeching at me about how unfair this supposedly was. You can't compare them like that. Yes, I can. I did. There's a whole video. Do you not know what the word comparison means? So, let's put ourselves in their shoes for a second and try and figure out why they were seemingly so upset about this. Why they were saying such stupid things without thinking. Why did they claim this was an unfair comparison? I suspect it might be because they have never really realized just how blurry the Steam Deck gameplay for Cyberpunk is in these Golden 40 settings. How do they not notice? Well, I'd bet most Steam Deck owners use it as a secondary gaming device, much like I do with my own ROG Ally. So that means if we are playing PC games on a desktop monitor or on TV-sized screens, we're probably doing that from our main gaming PCs, which are much more powerful. And the only time the Steam Deck gets used is when handheld mode is desirable. And as I have very frequently repeated in, probably 80-90% of every single video I've ever made about the ROG's gameplay performance or whatever, that 7-inch 1080p 120Hz FreeSync premium screen hides a lot of the crimes. That's always the phrase I've been using. It hides the crimes. A screen this size, at this resolution, this perceived pixel density really does do the visual presentation of gameplay a lot of favors. And the same is true of the Switch Lite. I remember the first time I played Monster Hunter Rise on it, I was very pleasantly surprised how much better the game seemed to look on its 5.5-inch 720p screen compared to the 6.5-inch 720p screen on the regular Switch model. 1 inch was all the difference, but it was the same resolution, and that meant it had a higher pixel density, and that helped hide more of the crimes of this game running in its reduced settings for handheld gameplay. So I imagine that is why at least a fair chunk of Steam Deck owners were shocked when they saw the game looking so mushy in my other video and started questioning my methodology, starting getting really angry about how it's unfair to compare them like that. Because they're just not used to seeing these crimes exposed. They're used to the crimes being hidden. So, with the comparisons I've done the way I've done them in this video, you might have to look a lot harder to see what in the original comparison video were extremely obvious differences between the Steam Deck and the Switch 2 gameplay. But here's the real kicker of it all. When we do finally get some extended and well-captured gameplay from the handheld mode of the Switch 2 with this game, it will still be vastly superior to the Steam Deck, because the fair comparison would need you to reduce the TDP on the deck to match the less than 10 watts the Switch 2 uses system-wide in handheld mode. And there's a distinction there, did you hear it? TDP versus system-wide. The Steam Deck's TDP setting is just the amount of power it's sending to the APU. The screen, the speakers, the Wi-Fi, all of that is on top of the TDP. So you would really need to run at 9, maybe even 8 TDP to match the handheld power profile. All these Steam Deck users seem so certain would be the most fair way to do this comparison. And considering the Steam Deck needs 15 watts TDP to reach 40 FPS target in this game, in these settings, and we already know the Switch 2 can do 40 FPS for this game in the low power handheld mode for the VRR screen, I guarantee you the Steam Deck still loses on that comparison, because you'll have to turn those settings down even further to maintain 40 FPS in this 8 watt power matched mode. I don't tend to like to run my mouth unless I've done some diligence and fact-checking, or indeed done the tests my own damn self. And I can tell you right now, even the much more powerful ROG Ally, compared to the Steam Deck, the ROG Ally is way more powerful, it cannot run Cyberpunk at 40 FPS, even at the lowest settings in this game, in its own 10 watt low power TDP mode. Because this is it. That's what happens when you try that. This is as low as you can set the game to run. There are no more settings to turn down. It's at 720p with XeSS upscaling helping it out. Yeah, this is still using more power than the Switch 2 version will be using in its handheld mode, in performance mode, that targets 40 FPS at 720p to scale to the 1080p screen. Come on! And we don't have any good extended gameplay footage in handheld mode for this game as yet, but I feel fairly confident in at least predicting, even if you did an unfair match of the Switch in its handheld low power mode and the Steam Deck in its highest power mode, it would still come out second best. Because of optimizations for single target hardware that consoles enable, and because DLSS is so much better than the other upscaling options that the Steam Deck has to use. So you want to whine about what is fair and what is unfair about these comparisons, or do you want to make comparisons at settings that people actually use? I do practical tests around here. You don't see many, if any, bar graphs in my content. I test things the way people use them. You can whine as much as you like about how you imagine it should work based on staring at numbers on charts and parroting back some tech information you heard somewhere but didn't quite understand the full ramifications of when you look at a thing as a whole, as an end product. But I'll be over here just being useful instead. That's what I'll be doing, because that's what I do, or at least attempt to. Thanks. Bye, Felicia. To the rest of you, just enjoying me ripping these dopes yet another bum void. Hope you had some fun on the ride here. Hopefully this was interesting, insightful, whatever. Thank you very much for watching. I do hope you've left a comment and a thumb along the way. I am Blunty. Thanks as always to the patrons, and I will catch you next time.
Hey, here for a pickup. Order number 48.